She sheltered the Mafia boss during the freezing winter. But 7 days later, 20 appeared at her restaurant, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Subscribe now or lose us forever. Your comments and shares are our lifeline. Don't let this be our only encounter. Story unfolds. The blizzard that hit Chicago that January was the worst in 50 years. A merciless whiteout that swallowed the city whole. Melissa Wright wiped down the counter of her small restaurant for the third time that hour, a nervous habit when business was slow. At 26, she was both owner and sole employee of the Hearth, a modest establishment she'd poured every penny of her inheritance into after her grandmother passed. Tonight, like the 3 nights before, not a single customer had walked through her door. The howling wind rattled the windows as if mocking her silent desperation. Another week like this and she might not make rent. She was about to turn off the lights when she spotted a dark figure stumbling through the snow. The silhouette weaved unsteadily, barely visible through the frosted glass. Then it collapsed against her door. Melissa rushed forward, hesitating only briefly before unlocking the entrance. Self-preservation warred with basic humanity as she pulled open the door, nearly knocked back by the blast of Arctic air. A man fell inward, his body frighteningly cold to the touch. His expensive suit was soaked through, his face alarmingly pale except for patches of angry red where frostbite threatened. "Oh my God!" she whispered, dragging him inside with strength she didn't know she possessed. "Can you hear me?" His eyes flickered open, dark and unfocused, but somehow still intense. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. "Don't try to talk," she instructed, locking the door and hurrying to turn up the heat. "Let's get you warm." She helped him to a booth near the kitchen, the warmest spot in the restaurant. His breathing was shallow, his entire body trembling violently. Hypothermia, she realized. Without thinking twice, she rushed to make hot tea, then disappeared into the kitchen to prepare the heartiest soup she had. When she returned, the man was hunched over the table, his large hands wrapped around the mug of tea, eyes closed as if gathering strength. "I've got soup coming," she said. "You need to warm up from the inside out." He nodded almost imperceptibly. "What were you doing out there?" Melissa asked, sliding into the booth across from him. "The weather service has been warning about this storm for days." He took a shaky sip of tea before answering. "Car broke down, phone dead." Each word seemed to cost him tremendous effort. She studied him more carefully now. Despite his current state, there was something undeniably commanding about him. Even half frozen, his presence filled the small restaurant. His clothes, though soaked, were clearly expensive. A tailored suit beneath a cashmere overcoat. A heavy gold watch peeked from his sleeve. * Not your average stranded traveler. "I'm Melissa," she offered. "This is my place." "Anthony," he managed, his voice gaining a little strength. His accent carried hints of old-world Italian beneath Chicago inflections. The soup, her grandmother's recipe, thick with vegetables and beef, revived him somewhat. Color gradually returned to his face, and his trembling subsided. By the time he'd finished the bowl, he seemed almost human again. "Thank you," he said, his voice now a deep, smooth baritone that sent an unexpected shiver up her spine. "Anyone would have done the same," she replied, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. He glanced toward the windows, where the blizzard showed no signs of relenting. "I don't suppose there's a hotel nearby?" Melissa shook her head. "Nothing within walking distance, and no taxis will be running in this. There's a cot in my back office you can use." The offer surprised her almost as much as it seemed to surprise him. "Just until the storm passes," she added quickly. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes now clear and perceptive. "Why would you trust a stranger?" It was a fair question, a woman alone, offering shelter to an unknown man. But something in her gut told her that while this man might be dangerous in certain contexts, he wasn't a threat to her. "Because you need help," she said simply. "And I'm not in the habit of sending people back into blizzards." A slight smile curved his lips, the first she'd seen. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and revealing a dimple in his left cheek. Your kindness is unexpected. The next 7 days passed in a strange sort of isolation as the blizzard raged outside, effectively cutting them off from the rest of the world. The power flickered but never fully failed, a small mercy. With nowhere to go and nothing to do but wait out the storm, they fell into an unexpected routine. Anthony recovered quickly, revealing a quiet strength that suggested he was accustomed to overcoming adversity. During the day, he helped around the restaurant, fixing the leaky faucet that had been bothering her for months, reinforcing the back door that never quite closed properly. At night, they talked over simple meals she prepared from her dwindling supplies. He spoke little about himself, deflecting personal questions with practiced ease. But he listened, truly listened, when she talked about her grandmother, the restaurant, her dreams of expansion that seemed increasingly unlikely given the economic reality. On the 7th day, the storm finally broke. Sunlight glinted blindingly off mountains of snow, and the sound of distant plows promised eventual reconnection with civilization. Anthony stood at the window, phone in hand, finally able to get reception. "I've arranged transportation," he said after a brief call. "They'll be here within the hour." Melissa nodded, surprised by the disappointment that washed over her. Their week together had been oddly comfortable, as if they'd known each other far longer than 7 days. "I'm in your debt," he said, turning to face her. "I don't take that lightly." "There's no debt," she insisted. "I'm just glad you didn't freeze to death on my doorstep. Bad for business." Her attempted humor fell flat against the sudden intensity of his gaze. "Nevertheless," he continued, "I pay what I owe. Always." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, simple white cardstock with just a phone number embossed in black. "If you ever need anything at all, call this number." She took the card reflexively. "That's not necessary. Keep it anyway." There was something in his tone that discouraged argument. A sleek black SUV pulled up outside an hour later. 2 large men in dark suits emerged, scanning the area with professional vigilance before approaching the restaurant. Anthony gathered his now dry clothes, pausing at the door. "Thank you, Melissa Wright," he said. The way he said her name made it sound like something precious. "For everything." Then he was gone, leaving only the memory of his presence and a simple white card with a phone number. 3 weeks passed. The city dug itself out from the historic blizzard. Life resumed its normal rhythms, and Melissa tried to convince herself that the strange week with the mysterious Anthony had been nothing more than an interesting anecdote, something to tell her grandchildren someday. Business remained slow but steady, enough to keep the doors open, but not much more. She was serving a late lunch to her regular Thursday customers when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, and her heart stuttered. 20 men in immaculate suits filed into her restaurant, filling every available table. At their center, commanding attention without saying a word, was Anthony. He looked entirely different from the half-frozen man she'd rescued, powerful, imposing, his dark suit perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders, his presence causing conversations to halt mid-sentence. The other diners stared, then hurriedly asked for their checks, clearly intimidated by the newcomers. Anthony approached the counter where Melissa stood frozen, a coffee pot forgotten in her hand. He smiled, that same smile that revealed the unexpected dimple, but now it was framed by the unmistakable aura of authority. "Ms. Wright," he said with a slight nod, "I hope you don't mind us dropping in." "Of course not," she managed, professionalism kicking in despite her shock. "Welcome to the hearth." He gestured to the men now occupying her restaurant. "My associates and I were looking for somewhere to discuss business. I recommended your establishment highly." One of the older men, silver-haired with an expensive-looking ring on each finger, called out. "So this is the place that saved our Dawn from becoming an icicle." Dawn. The title hit Melissa like a physical blow. She'd heard enough stories growing up in Chicago to know what that meant. The pieces clicked into horrifying place. The expensive clothes, the commanding presence, the way he'd carefully avoided personal details. Anthony Moretti, head of the Moretti crime family, the man who controlled half of Chicago's underworld. And she'd let him sleep on her office cot for a week. "Your coffee is excellent, Anthony." "No, Don Moretti," she thought as he spoke smoothly, either not noticing her realization or choosing to ignore it. "Perhaps you could bring 20 cups while we settle in." Melissa nodded numbly, retreating to the kitchen on autopilot. Her hands trembled as she arranged cups on trays. The Mafia. She'd saved the life of a Mafia boss. And now he and his entire family, organization, whatever the proper term was, they were sitting in her restaurant ordering coffee as if this were perfectly normal. By the time she emerged with the first tray of cups, the men had arranged themselves around the tables with Anthony at the center, his back to the wall, facing the door, a position that allowed him to observe everything. Their conversation halted as she approached, resuming only after she'd retreated again. Throughout the afternoon, they ordered practically everything on her menu, consuming food and drinks as they conducted their business in hushed tones. They tipped generously, treated her with formal respect, and acted for all the world like ordinary businessmen. If ordinary businessmen carried concealed weapons and commanded immediate deference from everyone around them. As evening approached, the men began to leave in small groups until only Anthony remained, sitting at a corner table with a half-empty cup of coffee. "You figured it out," he said when she approached to clear his cup. It wasn't a question. Melissa nodded anyway, suddenly very aware of how empty the restaurant had become. "Does that change things?" he asked, his voice neutral, but his eyes intent on her face. Should it? A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Most people would be running for the door." "It's my restaurant," she reminded him, surprising herself with her boldness. "And you're still a customer." He leaned back, studying her with renewed interest. "A customer who happens to be Don Moretti. A customer who needed help and received it," she countered. "What you do outside these walls is your business." Anthony stood, towering over her small frame. "My associates were impressed with your establishment. Expect them to become regulars." It sounded like both a promise and a warning. "I treat all my customers the same," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "And that," he replied, reaching for his coat, "is precisely why we'll be back." He placed several $100 bills on the table for today's service. "This is too much," she protested. "Consider it an investment in a valued establishment." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Your kindness was not misplaced, Melissa. Neither is my gratitude." After he left, Melissa sank into a chair, the full weight of the situation finally hitting her. She had inadvertently earned the patronage, and possibly the protection, of the most powerful criminal organization in the city. The question was whether that would prove to be her salvation or her ruin. The hearth transformed virtually overnight. Each day brought waves of expensively dressed men who ordered lavishly and tipped extravagantly. They arrived in gleaming black cars, spoke in respectful, hushed tones around Melissa, and created an atmosphere of contained danger that somehow drew in other customers rather than repelling them. Within 3 weeks, Melissa had to hire 2 additional servers and a line cook just to keep up with demand. Within 6 weeks, she'd paid off the outstanding mortgage on the restaurant and was considering renovations. Money that had been so tight for so long now flowed freely, all because she'd opened her door during a blizzard. Anthony himself appeared unpredictably, sometimes alone for a quiet coffee in the corner, sometimes with his inner circle for lengthy business discussions conducted in a mixture of English and Italian. He always greeted her with that same dimpled smile, always asked about the restaurant's needs, and always left generous payment, regardless of how often she insisted it wasn't necessary. She learned to recognize the hierarchy among his men. Salvatore, the silver-haired older man, was Anthony's consigliere, advisor, and right hand. Marco and Luca, 2 broad-shouldered men who rarely spoke, were his primary security. There were others whose names she gradually came to know. Vincent, who handled the books. Dominic, who oversaw what they euphemistically called territorial disputes. Paolo, who managed their legitimate businesses. They never discussed their illegal activities in her presence, maintaining the polite fiction that they were simply businessmen with particular security concerns. She never asked questions, telling herself that their money spent the same as anyone else's. But sometimes, When she caught glimpses of their conversation, or noticed the occasional bruised knuckles or concealed weapon, reality would crash through her carefully constructed denial. These men were criminals, dangerous ones, and their boss was becoming increasingly important to her in ways that had nothing to do with business. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. The restaurant was quiet, just a few regular customers scattered among the tables. Anthony sat in his usual corner, reading something on his tablet while nursing a cup of espresso. He'd been coming alone more frequently lately, sometimes staying for hours with minimal interaction. Melissa was wiping down the counter when the bell chimed. Two men she didn't recognize entered, their eyes scanning the restaurant with predatory intensity. Unlike Anthony's associates, who wore their danger with refined restraint, these men radiated crude violence. Every instinct told Melissa something was wrong. She glanced at Anthony, who had lowered his tablet slightly, his expression hardening. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "We're looking for someone," the taller man said, his gaze fixed not on her, but on Anthony. "Heard he might be here." "We serve anyone who's hungry," she replied carefully. "What can I get you?" The shorter man sneered. "We're not here to eat, sweetheart." Before she could respond, Anthony stood. The movement was unhurried, almost casual, but it immediately commanded attention. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "I believe you've wandered into the wrong establishment." The taller man's hand drifted toward his jacket. "Moretti, fancy meeting you here without your usual entourage." Melissa's heart raced. This was about to become violent. She could feel it in the atmosphere, see it in the coiled tension of Anthony's posture, despite his relaxed expression. "Mr. Moretti is a valued customer," she interrupted, surprising even herself. "And I don't allow trouble in my restaurant." All three men looked at her with varying degrees of shock. "Ma'am," the taller intruder said, a hint of confusion in his voice, "you might want to step outside for a minute." "No," she said firmly, reaching below the counter where she kept a baseball bat. "I want you both to leave now." A flicker of amusement crossed Anthony's face before it returned to its impassive mask. "You heard the lady," he said. "This isn't the place." A tense moment passed. The other customers had gone silent, some slowly edging toward the exits. Finally, the shorter man muttered something to his companion. They backed toward the door, the taller one calling out, "Another time, Moretti. I look forward to it." Anthony replied evenly. When they were gone, he approached the counter, his eyes never leaving Melissa's face. "That was incredibly foolish," he said, but there was no anger in his tone, only concern tinged with something that might have been admiration. "They were disrupting my business," she replied, trying to ignore the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Do you know who they work for?" She shook her head. "The Cardano family, our primary competitors." His mouth twisted slightly at the word. "And they now know that this place matters to me." The implication hung heavy between them. By intervening, she'd revealed her importance. "I can take care of myself," she said, though they both knew that against men like those she stood no chance. Anthony looked around the restaurant at the few remaining customers trying not to stare, at the cheerful decor she'd worked so hard to perfect. When his eyes returned to hers, they held a decision. "We need to talk," he said quietly. The hours until closing dragged interminably. Melissa served customers, prepared food, and tried to act as if nothing had happened. But her mind kept returning to Anthony's words and the danger they implied. He'd left shortly after the incident, making a few quick phone calls on his way out, but promised to return. At precisely 8 p.m., as she was turning the sign to closed, a familiar black SUV pulled up outside. Anthony emerged alone, unusual for him in the evening hours, and waited for her to unlock the door. "Let's sit down," he suggested once inside, gesturing to a booth far from the windows. He'd changed clothes since the afternoon, now wearing a more casual outfit of dark slacks and a gray sweater that somehow made him look more approachable, but no less powerful. "Those men," she began as they Saturday, "they were here to hurt you." "Most likely." He didn't sugarcoat it. The Cardanos have been testing boundaries lately, but that's not what we need to discuss. She raised an eyebrow. He leaned forward slightly. We need to discuss you and what happens now. What do you mean? Your intervention today marked you. The Cardanos now know you have some connection to me beyond serving coffee. That makes you a potential target. The reality of those words hit her hard. She'd known, of course, that Anthony's world was dangerous, but she'd maintained the comforting illusion that she existed outside of it, adjacent but untouched. So what happens now? She echoed his words. That depends on you. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. The safest option would be for me and my men to stop coming here. Remove the association. The thought of not seeing him again created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. And the other options? His eyes, always intense, seemed to see straight through her. I assign men to watch the restaurant. You accept certain security measures. We continue as before, but with added precautions. And the cost of such protection? She asked, not naively. A flash of something, was it hurt? Crossed his features before his expression became unreadable again. There is no cost. You saved my life. I protect yours. A fair exchange. Is that what this is about? Repaying a debt? It began that way, he admitted, his voice dropping lower. It's become more complicated. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. How complicated? She dared to ask. Instead of answering, he changed tactics. Do you know what I am, Melissa? Truly know? You're the head of the Moretti family, Adon. The word still felt foreign on her tongue. And do you know what that means? She met his gaze steadily. You're a criminal. Your business involves things I probably don't want details about. He nodded, accepting her assessment without offense. I've hurt people, ordered others hurt. I control territory through means that would horrify you. My world operates by different rules than yours. Why are you telling me this? Because, he said with sudden fierce intensity. Before this goes any further, you need to understand what you're becoming involved with. Who I am. Further? She repeated, her heart accelerating. Anthony reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers, offering but not presuming. I find myself thinking about you far more than is prudent, coming here when there's no business reason, making excuses to extend conversations. Melissa stared at his outstretched hand. This was the line, the boundary between her old life and something unknown. Everything in her rational mind screamed to pull back, to maintain the simple customer-proprietor relationship that was already dangerous enough. Instead, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and surprisingly gentle for hands she knew could be deadly. I've noticed, she admitted quietly. A genuine smile transformed his face. And yet you never mentioned it. I thought I was imagining things that someone like you wouldn't. Someone like me, he interrupted, rarely gets to be simply a man. With you, during that week, I was nothing more than Anthony. Not Don Moretti, not the boss, just a man indebted to a kind woman. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I've missed that simplicity. The tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with everything she knew about him, creating a dissonance she couldn't quite reconcile. This is insane, she whispered. Yes, he agreed. Completely insane. His free hand reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. Which is why I need you to be certain. Melissa felt herself standing at a precipice. Behind her lay safety, normalcy, the life she'd built. Before her, an abyss of unknowns with this dangerous man at its center. I'm not certain of anything, she said honestly. Except that I don't want you to stop coming here. It wasn't quite a declaration, but from the way his eyes darkened, it might as well have been. Then we proceed carefully, he said, his voice rough with restraint. Very carefully. As if to demonstrate his meaning, he lifted her hand to his lips, placing a kiss against her knuckles that was barely a whisper of contact. The restrained gesture sent a shiver through her, more powerful than any passionate embrace could have. My men will watch the restaurant, he continued, still holding her hand. You'll notice them, but they'll be discreet. If anyone suspicious appears, you call me immediately. His expression turned deadly serious. Promise me, Melissa. I promise. Good. He released her hand and stood. I should go. It's late and you need to rest. She walked him to the door, acutely aware of the charged atmosphere between them. At the threshold, he turned to face her once more. There's something you should know, he said quietly. In my world, when a Don shows interest in someone, it marks them in ways beyond what happened today. It offers protection, yes, but also creates expectation. My men will treat you differently now. As what? She asked. His lips curved in that now familiar half-smile. As someone who matters to me, which means you matter to them. After he left, Melissa leaned against the closed door, her mind spinning. In the space of a few weeks, her life she'd been transformed beyond recognition. Her struggling restaurant was now thriving. Her simple existence now complicated by a man whose world operated by rules she barely understood. What scared her most wasn't the danger itself. It was how utterly compelling she found him despite it, or maybe even because of it. It was the intensity in his eyes when he looked at her, the careful restraint in his touch, and those fleeting glimpses of vulnerability hidden beneath his powerful exterior. She was falling for a mafia boss, and there was absolutely nothing simple about that terrifying realization. True to Anani's word, the heightened security presence around the hearth became noticeably apparent in the following days, though it remained subtle enough not to disturb her regular customers. A sleek black sedan was perpetually parked across the street, with rotating men whom she came to recognize as part of Anani's organization. Occasionally, sharply dressed figures in suits would occupy corner tables, ordering next to nothing but keeping a watchful eye on everything that moved. Business continued to boom, now attracting not just Anani's associates, but also a steadily growing clientele drawn by the restaurant's mysterious new cash and, of course, its excellent food. Melissa expanded her menu, hired more staff, and even began renovating the unused second floor into a private dining area for special occasions. Anthony visited almost daily, sometimes for just a few brief minutes, other times lingering for hours on end. Their relationship evolved in slow, careful increments. A lingering touch as she served his coffee, private conversations in hushed tones after the last customer had left, the gradual dissolution of that professional distance that had once separated them. 3 weeks after their initial conversation, he invited her to dinner, not at the hearth, but at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the shimmering lake. I can't remember the last time someone else cooked for me, Melissa admitted as they were shown to a secluded table with spectacular views. She felt distinctly out of place in the elegant surroundings, despite the brand-new dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. Anthony, of course, looked perfectly at home. His tailored suit and confident demeanor seemed tailor-made for such settings. A chef should sometimes be a guest, he said, ordering a bottle of wine with a casual expertise that served as a stark reminder of the vast differences in their respective worlds. As they dined, he inquired about her childhood, her dreams for the restaurant, her life before he had quite literally stumbled through her front door. Unlike their previous conversations, which had been constrained by the restaurant setting, here, he seemed genuinely determined to know absolutely everything about her. Why the restaurant business? He asked as they finished their entrees. You mentioned your grandmother left you the building, but not why you chose to open the hearth rather than simply sell the property. Melissa sipped her wine, gathering her thoughts. Considering my parents died in a car accident when I was only 12, my grandmother raised me, and her kitchen was the only place where I truly felt safe afterward. The memory brought a mixture of both pain and comfort. She taught me to cook as a way to process grief. She always said that feeding people was a form of love that transcended mere words. Anthony listened intently, his usual mask of control seeming to soften ever so slightly. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. When she passed away and left me the building, turning it into a restaurant felt like the only possible choice. She smiled slightly, adding, though, if she could see the clientele I'm serving these days, she might have a few questions. He laughed, a genuine sound that completely transformed his face, making him appear younger and far less intimidating. I imagine she would. Your turn, she said, emboldened by the wine and the intimate setting. You know my whole story. I know almost nothing about yours. His expression flickered almost imperceptibly, but he didn't deflect as he usually did. What would you like to know? How does someone become what you are? She couldn't quite bring herself to say Don or Mafia boss in the elegant restaurant, though they both knew perfectly well what she meant. Anthony was silent for a long moment, swirling the remaining wine thoughtfully in his glass. In my case, by birth, my father was Don before me, and his father before him. I was raised knowing that my future was predetermined. You never wanted anything else? A flicker of something, regret perhaps, or maybe just resignation, crossed his face fleetingly. I studied architecture in college, designed buildings that would never be built. He set down his glass deliberately. But family obligations aren't exactly optional in my world. So, you took over when your father... She let the question hang in the air. Died, he finished. 5 years ago. Heart attack, not violence, despite what the papers suggested. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. Does it bother you? What I am? The question was deceptively simple, but Melissa knew that her answer mattered deeply to him. I'd be lying if I said no, she admitted honestly. There are aspects of your life that I don't particularly want to think about. But, he prompted when she hesitated. But I've seen how you treat your people, how you treat me. There's an inherent sense of honor in that, even if it exists alongside things that I wouldn't necessarily approve of. Something in his posture relaxed, if only fractionally. A diplomatic answer. An honest one, she countered. I'm not nearly naive enough to think that I can somehow change you or your world. She paused, gathering her courage. I just want to see if there's room for me somewhere in it. Not as someone to be protected or an obligation to be fulfilled, but as. This time, his voice was barely above a whisper, laced with a vulnerability that she hadn't heard before. As someone who matters to you, for myself. Anthony reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. You already are, he said softly, his thumb tracing small, soothing patterns on her skin. More than you know. The drive back to the hearth was charged with unspoken tension. Anani's driver maintained a discreet silence as they traveled through the darkened city, the privacy partition firmly in place. Melissa was acutely aware of Anthony beside her, of the narrowing space between them as the car smoothly navigated the late-night streets. When they finally arrived, he walked her to the side door that led to her apartment above the restaurant. His security team remained in the vehicles, giving them a precious moment of relative privacy. I had a wonderful evening, she said, suddenly feeling shy, despite the growing intimacy between them. As did I. He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, to smell the subtle cologne that he wore. Melissa. The way he said her name, like a prayer and a question combined, broke something loose deep within her. She rose on tiptoes, closing the last remaining distance between them, and gently pressed her lips to his. For a single heartbeat, he remained perfectly still, as if he were unsure of how to respond. Then, his carefully constructed control shattered completely. His arms encircled her, pulling her firmly against his body, as he deepened the kiss with an unexpected intensity that stole her breath. One hand cradled the back of her head, holding her close, while the other pressed against her lower back, eliminating any and all remaining space between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, his eyes had darkened to near black. I've wanted to do that since the moment you brought me that soup during the blizzard, he confessed, his voice rough with barely suppressed desire. That long? She smiled, feeling strangely powerful at having affected him so deeply. Longer than was wise. His hand cupped her cheek gently, his thumb stroking her skin. I should go. The regret in his voice was palpable, but so was the remarkable restraint he was showing. He was giving her space, she realized, allowing her to set the pace of whatever was developing between them. Or you could come up, she suggested, surprising herself with her own boldness. For coffee. A faint smile played at the corners of his mouth. Coffee? Just coffee? Just coffee, she clarified, though they both clearly heard the underlying uncertainty in her voice. Anthony studied her face intently, as if trying to decipher her true intentions. Another time, he said gently, when you're certain that it's not just the wine and the evening. The genuine consideration in his response, so contrary to the ruthless image he presented to the rest of the world, touched her deeply. You're not at all what I expected, she admitted. Oh, his eyebrow arched in amusement. I expected someone who takes what he wants without asking. His expression sobered, becoming far more serious. In business, perhaps. Never with you. He brushed his lips softly against her forehead. Good night, Melissa. She watched him return to the waiting cars, her emotions a confusing tangle of disappointment and respect. Despite the undeniable physical attraction crackling between them, he'd chosen to wait, to give her the choice. It was both incredibly frustrating and incredibly endearing all at once. The next morning, Melissa arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual, her mind still replaying the events of the previous evening. She was unlocking the front door when a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. One of Anani's security details, she assumed, steeling herself for another day of watchful eyes. Instead, a woman emerged from the car, strikingly beautiful, impeccably dressed in a designer outfit that probably cost more than Melissa's monthly revenue. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon. Her makeup was flawless, and her entire demeanor screamed old money and unquestionable power. Ms. Wright? The woman inquired, her voice carrying a faint but distinct Italian accent. Yes, I'm Melissa Wright. Sophia Moretti. She extended a perfectly manicured hand. Anani's sister. Melissa's stomach dropped like a stone. She hadn't even known that he had a sister. Nice to meet you, she managed to say, shaking the offered hand. Would you like to come in? We're not officially open yet, but I can make some coffee. That would be lovely, Sophia replied with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Inside, Sophia surveyed the restaurant with the practiced assessment of someone who was accustomed to evaluating her surroundings, instantly calculating its strengths and weaknesses. Charming, she pronounced finally, taking a seat at the counter. I can certainly see why my brother finds it appealing. The subtle emphasis on the word, it wasn't lost on Melissa. Just coffee, or would you like something to eat? She asked, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the clear undertones of the conversation. Just coffee, thank you. Sophia casually adjusted a glittering diamond bracelet on her wrist. I won't take up much of your time. I simply wanted to meet the woman who has my brother visiting the same restaurant every single day like a lovesick teenager. Melissa nearly fumbled the coffee cup in surprise. I think you might be exaggerating just a bit. Sophia laughed lightly, a purely artificial sound. Anthony doesn't do anything without a very specific purpose. Except, it seems, when it comes to you. Her expression turned more serious, her eyes narrowing slightly. He told me about the blizzard, about how you helped him. Anyone would have done the same thing, Melissa protested. No, Sophia shook her head firmly. They wouldn't have, especially not knowing who he is. Melissa placed the steaming coffee carefully in front of her guest. I didn't know then, and now that you do? Now I know him as Anthony, not just his title or his position. Sophia studied her intently over the rim of her coffee cup, as if trying to discern the truth of her words. Interesting. Most people never manage to see past the dawn. She set down the cup with deliberate precision, the delicate china clinking softly against the counter. My brother's position comes with certain complications, certain expectations, certain dangers. He's made that perfectly clear, Melissa replied, beginning to fully understand the true purpose of this unexpected visit. Has he? Has he told you what happened to the last woman he cared for? The loaded question hung heavily in the air between them, thick with unspoken warnings. Melissa's heart raced, but she forced herself to keep her expression neutral, revealing nothing. No. Sophia nodded slowly, as if this response confirmed something that she had already suspected. Bianca, a lovely girl from a respectable family. They dated for almost a year. Then, the Cardanos decided that she was a convenient way to send a message to my brother. Her perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin, hard line. She survived, but she left the country afterward. She never spoke to Anthony again. Melissa swallowed hard, struggling to keep her composure. Why are you telling me all of this? Because my brother is always exceptionally careful with his business dealings but rather reckless with his heart. And because, unlike Bianca, you have absolutely no real idea of what you're walking into. Sophia's gaze softened, ever so slightly, revealing a hint of genuine concern. He likes you. More than he liked Bianca, if I'm being perfectly honest, which makes you both extremely valuable and extremely vulnerable. Are you trying to warn me off? Melissa asked directly. Sophia considered the question carefully. I'm providing you with information, so that you can make a fully informed decision. The Moretti family takes care of its own. But becoming a part of Anani's life means accepting risks that most ordinary people simply couldn't even imagine. I understand, Melissa said, trying to sound more confident than she actually felt. Do you really understand? Sophia raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow, clearly skeptical. The protection that he's arranged for you is quite noticeable. The Cardanos have already identified you as someone of interest. This, she gestured to the restaurant around them. Your normal life is already changing, whether you like it or not. Melissa straightened, resenting the implied challenge in Sophia's tone. With all due respect, Ms. Moretti, I do know that there are risks involved. Anthony has been very clear about that. But he's also allowed me to make my own choices, and I would certainly appreciate it if you would do the same. Instead of taking offense, Sophia smiled genuinely for the first time since she had arrived. Good. You have spine. You'll definitely need it. She reached into her designer handbag and extracted a small card, very similar to the one that Anthony had given Melissa weeks ago. My private number. Anani's not the only Moretti worth knowing. Melissa took the card, completely surprised by this apparent shift in attitude. I had to see for myself, Sophia explained, standing gracefully. Anthony doesn't trust easily. Neither do I. She adjusted her impeccably tailored designer jacket. But I can certainly see why he's drawn to you. There's something refreshingly direct about your manner. Thank you, Melissa said, unsure of whether it was actually a compliment. Sophia's smile turned knowing. It is a compliment. Believe me, in our world, straightforward people are exceedingly rare treasures. She moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to face Melissa one last time. One last thing. If you hurt him, if this is some kind of game or opportunistic play for your own personal gain, there's absolutely nowhere on this earth that you could possibly hide from me. Are we perfectly clear? The chilling threat was delivered with such casual elegance that it took Melissa a moment to fully process the underlying danger. Crystal clear, she replied, meeting Sophia's gaze without flinching. It's not like that. Good. Sophia nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then perhaps we'll even become friends, Ms. Wright. My brother could certainly use a few more genuine connections in his life. With that, she swept out of the restaurant, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive perfume and an undeniable aura of power. Melissa stood frozen, replaying the entire interaction in her mind. She had just been simultaneously threatened and potentially approved by Anani's sister, a woman whose very existence she hadn't even been aware of until a few minutes ago. The bell above the door chimed again, and she looked up, half expecting Sophia to have returned for some reason. Instead, Anthony himself stood in the doorway, his expression etched with concern. I just passed Sophia leaving, he said, approaching the counter. I had no idea she was planning to visit you. That makes two of us? Melissa replied, still trying to process everything that had just happened. Anani's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. What exactly did she say to you? She warned me about the potential risks of being associated with you. About someone named Bianca. He closed his eyes briefly, a flicker of old pain crossing his features. I should have told you about Bianca myself. Why didn't you? Because it's not exactly a story I particularly enjoy remembering, he sighed. running a weary hand through his dark hair. And because I honestly didn't want to frighten you any more than was absolutely necessary. I'm not exactly easily frightened, she reminded him, reaching across the counter to gently touch his hand. But I definitely do prefer honesty, even when it's a little uncomfortable. Anthony nodded slowly in understanding. You're absolutely right. No more protected truths between us. He took her hand in his gaze intense. Tonight, after closing, I'll tell you everything about Bianca, about my family, and about the stark realities of my world. And then Melissa. He squeezed her hand gently, his eyes searching hers. If you still want this, then we move forward together with a perfectly clear understanding of everything. I'll definitely hold you to that, she said, squeezing his hand in return. The weighty significance of his promise hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Whatever happened tonight would either define their path forward or end any budding possibilities before they had even truly begun. As Anthony turned to leave, Melissa called out after him. Your sister also said one other thing. He paused, turning back to face her, an intrigued look on his face. Oh? What's that? That you've been acting like a lovesick teenager. His surprised laugh, genuinely unguarded, filled the entire restaurant, washing away some of the previous tension. Sophia always did have a rather unique talent for pointing out uncomfortable truths. His eyes, when they met hers, held a warmth that stood in stark contrast to his dangerous reputation. Perhaps she's not entirely wrong. After he finally left, Melissa began her usual opening routine, her mind still spinning with both thrilling and terrifying possibilities. Tonight, she would learn the unfiltered truth about Anthony Moretti's world, and then she would have to decide if her heart was truly willing to risk absolutely everything to be a part of it. The restaurant was completely silent, the last of the evening staff long gone. Melissa sat across from Anthony in the dimly lit dining room, amidst the remains of a simple meal that she had prepared for them. She had deliberately closed early tonight, in anticipation of the difficult conversation to come. Bianca Rossi, Anthony began, his voice low and carefully controlled. Daughter of an old family friend. We met at a charity event 5 years ago, shortly before my father passed away. His fingers traced the rim of his half-empty wine glass. She was beautiful, educated, and from the right sort of family. The perfect match according to all the traditional standards. Melissa listened silently, carefully noting how his expression remained perfectly neutral, despite the obvious emotion that swirled deep within his eyes. We courted properly. Chaperone dates, formal dinners. All very traditional. After my father's death, when I assumed leadership, things accelerated rather quickly. He took a measured sip of wine, as if fortifying himself for what he was about to reveal. She understood our world, its rules, or so I thought at the time. What actually happened? Melissa prompted gently when he fell silent, lost in his memories. The Cardanos happened. His jaw tightened noticeably. They were aggressively expanding at that time, testing boundaries in the wake of my father's death, seeing if the new Don possessed the same level of resolve. He met her eyes directly, his gaze unflinching. They took her on her way home from her sister's house, and they kept her for 3 days. Melissa's breath caught sharply in her throat. Did they? No. He interrupted quickly, his voice strained. Physical violence only. They knew that certain lines simply couldn't be crossed without igniting a full-scale war that would inevitably destroy both families. His knuckles whitened around the stem of the wine glass. But it was more than enough. When we finally found her, she was changed. I'm so sorry, Melissa whispered, her voice filled with genuine empathy. She left the country within a week, moved to Europe to start over. Last I heard, she married a Swiss banker. He set down the glass carefully, as if it were a fragile thing that might shatter at any moment. She was right to leave. My life, wasn't at all what she had thought it would be. Is that why you've been so careful with me? Why you've given me so many chances to simply walk away? Anani's eyes, when they finally met hers, held a raw vulnerability that she had rarely witnessed. You didn't choose this world, Melissa. You own a restaurant. You serve food to people. Your life should be simple, uncomplicated. Life is rarely simple, she countered softly. No, but some complications are definitely far more dangerous than others. He leaned forward, his gaze intense and unwavering. My men are watching this place around the clock. The protection that I can provide is substantial, but it's definitely not perfect. The Cardanos know about you now, not just as the owner of the restaurant that I frequent, but as someone who actually matters to me. And that makes you a potential target. He acknowledged the stark truth of the situation. Which is why you need to be absolutely certain, Melissa, completely certain that this is what you truly want. She carefully considered his words, weighing the potential consequences. The past few weeks had irrevocably transformed her quiet, uneventful existence into something far more complex and infinitely more dangerous. And yet, there was also a strange sense of vitality to it, a feeling of being fully alive that she had never truly experienced before. And at the very center of it all was this complicated man, with his surprising contradictions and unexpected moments of tenderness. Tell me something, she said, breaking the silence. That night, during the blizzard, would you have hurt me if I hadn't helped you? His brow furrowed in confusion at the unexpected question. No, never. Why not? I could have identified you to the police, called them right then and there. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Because that's simply not who I am, Melissa. Violence is a tool that I use when absolutely necessary, not some sort of default setting. He reached across the table, offering her his open palm in a gesture of peace, an offering rather than a demand. There are lines that I simply don't cross, Melissa. Even in my world, there are rules, codes of conduct that I live by. She placed her hand in his, her fingers interlacing with his. I believe you, Anthony, and that's precisely why I'm still here. The air between them crackled with unspoken emotion. Anani's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, sending shivers down her spine. There's something that I need to show you, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Not tonight, but very soon. A glimpse into my world, the full reality of it. After that, if you still want this. He left the sentence unfinished, allowing the possibilities to hang in the air between them. I'm not easily frightened, remember? She reminded him, echoing her earlier words. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, softening his harsh features. No, you're definitely not. It's one of the things that He caught himself abruptly, his eyes darkening with a sudden intensity. One of the things that I find remarkable about you. The almost confession hung in the air between them, thick with unspoken desire. Melissa felt her heart quicken its pace as Anthony stood, gently pulling her to her feet while still holding her hand. They stood close together, the palpable heat of his body radiating outwards in the quiet restaurant. I should probably go, he murmured, though he made absolutely no move to release her hand. You could stay, she offered, her voice barely above a whisper, filled with a longing she could no longer deny. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing softly across her lower lip, sending a jolt of electricity through her entire body. When this happens, he said, his voice rough with barely suppressed restraint, it will be with complete certainty. No doubts, no shadows between us. The promise in his heartfelt words sent a wave of heat coursing through her veins. Anthony lowered his head slowly, giving her every possible opportunity to pull away, to change her mind. Instead, she rose to meet him, their lips connecting in a kiss that started out gentle but quickly blazed into something far more demanding and all-consuming. His arms encircled her, one hand tangling in her hair, holding her captive, while the other pressed urgently against her lower back, eliminating any and all space between them. Melissa felt herself melting into him, relishing the solid warmth of his chest, the surprising softness of his lips that contrasted so sharply with the controlled strength of his powerful embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, his eyes had darkened to obsidian. Melissa! He whispered her name like a prayer, a plea. A sharp, insistent knock at the front door shattered the fragile moment. Ananis' entire posture shifted instantly, his body angling to instinctively place himself between her and the potential threat. One of his security team stood anxiously outside, his expression urgent and deeply concerned. Ananis' jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. "Wait here," he instructed her, moving swiftly to the door. The hushed conversation that followed was too quiet for Melissa to hear, but she could easily read the palpable tension in every line of Ananis' body. When he finally turned back to face her, his entire demeanor had completely transformed. The tender, passionate lover had been instantly replaced by the cold, calculating Dawn. "I need to go," he said, his voice now carrying a sharp, unfamiliar edge. "Marco will drive you upstairs and stay posted outside your apartment tonight." "What's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Anthony hesitated, visibly struggling between his ingrained instinct to shield her from harm and his recent promise of complete honesty. "The Cardanos made a move against one of our businesses. I need to respond immediately." The clinical, detached way he said it sent a chill straight through her bones. This was the stark reality of his dangerous world, the part that he had been so carefully trying to protect her from experiencing firsthand. "Will there be?" She couldn't quite bring herself to form the dreaded question. "Yes," he answered anyway, clearly understanding her unspoken concern. His expression softened slightly, and he reached out to gently touch her cheek. "This is who I am, Melissa. This is what I do." She nodded slowly, suddenly feeling the full, crushing weight of what it truly meant to be involved with a man like him. "Be careful," she pleaded. A sad, almost wistful smile touched his lips fleetingly. "Always." He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to face her one last time. "Tomorrow noon, I'll send a car for you." It wasn't quite a question, but more of an unspoken arrangement. "I'll be ready," she promised, her voice filled with a quiet resolve. After he left, Marco, Ananis' most trusted security man, efficiently escorted her to her apartment, immediately taking up a strategic position outside her door with silent competence. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind racing, filled with troubling images of Anthony in this completely different role, this ruthless aspect of his life that she had only glimpsed in brief, unsettling fragments. The morning newspapers carried absolutely nothing about any sort of disturbance, but Melissa hadn't honestly expected that they would. The true, shadowy workings of Ananis' world happened far beyond the reach and awareness of ordinary citizens. At precisely noon, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb outside of the restaurant. The driver wasn't one she immediately recognized, but he carried himself with the same watchful alertness and controlled intensity as Ananis' other men. "Ms. Wright," he greeted her formally. "Don Moretti sends his sincerest apologies. He's been unavoidably detained, but he asks that you still proceed as planned. He will join you shortly." The drive took them to the far outskirts of the city, eventually turning down a private, winding road that led to an elegant mansion, nestled amidst meticulously landscaped grounds. Security personnel were visible but discreet, strategically positioned throughout the sprawling property. Surveillance cameras were mounted unobtrusively, constantly monitoring everything. Inside, Sophia waited for her in a sunlit conservatory, wearing casual designer clothing that somehow managed to look even more ridiculously expensive than her formal attire from the previous day. "Ananis running a bit late," she explained smoothly, gesturing for Melissa to take a seat. "The unexpected business from last night unfortunately required a more extensive cleanup than we had initially anticipated." The deliberate choice of words wasn't lost on Melissa, and a fresh wave of apprehension washed over her. "Is he okay?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine concern. Sophia studied her intently for a long moment, as if trying to gauge the sincerity of her question. "Physically, yes. Otherwise," she shrugged elegantly, dismissing the question with a subtle flick of her wrist. "My brother compartmentalizes exceptionally well. It's really quite necessary in his particular position." A uniformed housemaid appeared silently, offering them both refreshments. brought tea served in delicate china cups that probably cost more than Melissa's monthly rent. "This is his home?" Melissa asked, looking around at the tasteful luxury. "One of them," Sophia said, stirring her tea. "The family house where we grew up." Before Melissa could respond, the door opened. Anthony entered, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that revealed nothing of the night's activities. Only the faint shadows beneath his eyes hinted at a sleepless night. "I apologize for the delay," he said, crossing to kiss his sister's cheek before turning to Melissa with a more hesitant warmth. "Thank you for coming, despite my absence." "I've been entertaining your guest," Sophia said, rising gracefully. "But I'm sure you two have things to discuss." She squeezed Melissa's shoulder as she passed, a gesture of surprising solidarity. "Remember what I said?" She murmured before leaving them alone. Anthony watched his sister leave with a raised eyebrow. "Should I be concerned about what she told you?" "Probably," Melissa replied with a small smile that faded quickly. Last night, he moved to sit beside her. Close but not touching. Last night was business. Unpleasant but necessary. Did people get hurt? Anani's gaze was steady. Yes. The simple admission hung between them. Melissa had known, of course, had always known, but the confirmation still landed heavily. "This is my world, Melissa," he said quietly. "The parts one don't want touching you, but that inevitably will if we continue. Why show me this place now? Because you need to see all of it. The protection, the privilege, the power, and the price." He gestured to their surroundings. "This house represents generations of my family's legacy. Beautiful, impressive, built on foundations you might find troubling." Melissa looked around with new eyes, seeing beyond the elegant facade to the reality it represented. "Why me, Anthony? With your world, your position. Why choose someone like me?" He considered her question carefully. "Because you saw me, just me. When I was at my weakest. No pretense, no power, no position." His voice softened. "And because with you I can almost remember who I might have been in another life." The weeks that followed were a delicate dance between two worlds. By day, Melissa ran her thriving restaurant, now frequented by an intriguing mix of Anani's associates, curious locals, and food critics drawn by the establishment's growing reputation. By night, she was increasingly part of Anani's more private sphere, accompanying him to exclusive restaurants, attending small gatherings at his home, gradually meeting the inner circle that constituted his chosen family. Salvatore, his silver-haired consigliere, treated her with old-world courtesy that barely disguised his careful assessment. Marco and Luca, Anani's primary security, maintained professional distance, but gradually acknowledged her with subtle nods of respect. Sophia became an unexpected ally, offering insights into the unspoken rules of a world Melissa was still learning to navigate. Throughout it all, Anthony remained attentive but careful, never pushing her deeper than she seemed ready to go, always giving her space to retreat if she chose. "You're being watched," Sophia commented one afternoon over lunch at an upscale cafe. "Not just by Anani's security." Melissa set down her cup carefully. "The Cardanos, among others." Sophia's expression remained casual, though her eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. "You've become a person of interest in certain circles. The unknown woman who captured the attention of Don Moretti." "I'm hardly mysterious," Melissa protested. "I run a restaurant." Sophia's laugh was genuine, but tinged with something darker. "In our world, that makes you an anomaly. Anani's previous companions? We're all connected families. Predictable. You're an unknown variable. Is that dangerous?" "Everything in this life is dangerous," Sophia replied matter-of-factly. "But Anthony has been thoroughgoing with security arrangements." The euphemism wasn't lost on Melissa. In the weeks since their confrontation with the Cardanos, Anthony had methodically consolidated his position, strengthening alliances and eliminating vulnerabilities. She didn't ask for details, and he didn't offer them. But the increased deference shown to him by others in their circle told its own story. "There is an event tonight," Sophia continued, changing the subject with practiced ease. "A charity gala. Anani's attendance is expected. She studied Melissa over the rim of her cup. He wants you there. As his date, the prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. As his woman, Sophia corrected bluntly, it would be a public statement of intent. His protection made official. Melissa digested this. What would that mean exactly? It means the ambiguity ends. No more speculation about your position. You would be recognized as under his personal protection, off-limits to rivals, respected by allies. And what would be expected of me? Sophia smiled slightly, approving of the question. Loyalty, discretion. The understanding that certain topics remain within the family. Beyond that, she shrugged elegantly. Anthony has never cared much for traditional expectations. That evening, a package arrived at Melissa's apartment. Inside lay an evening gown in deep emerald silk along with a small velvet box containing a delicate diamond necklace. The card simply read, "No pressure, your choice." The gesture was typical of Anthony, offering without demanding, always giving her the freedom to step back if she chose. It made her decision both easier and more complicated. When his car arrived that evening, Anthony seemed genuinely surprised to see her waiting, dressed in the gown that fit as if made for her. "You came," he said softly as she slid into the seat beside him. "I'm here," she confirmed, noting how his eyes darkened appreciatively. He reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that had become familiar, yet still sent warmth coursing through her. "You understand what tonight means?" She met his gaze steadily. "I'm choosing this, choosing you." Something shifted in his expression, relief perhaps, or a deeper emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "The necklace suits you," he commented, his fingers brushing lightly against her collarbone where the diamonds rested. "It's beautiful, but too much," she protested. "It was my mother's." The simple statement silenced her objections immediately. Anthony rarely spoke of his mother, who had died when he was a teenager. That he would entrust Melissa with something of hers spoke volumes. The gala was held at one of Chicago's most prestigious hotels. The ballroom transformed into an elegant wonderland of flowers and lights. As they entered, Melissa was acutely aware of the reaction their arrival generated. The subtle pause in conversations, the assessing glances, the way people seemed to recalibrate their understanding of the power dynamics at play. Anthony navigated the crowd with practiced ease, his hand a constant presence at the small of her back as he introduced her to a carefully curated selection of guests, business associates, political figures, and members of other influential families. He never identified her as anything other than Melissa Wright, allowing their obvious closeness to speak for itself. "Don Moretti," a smooth voice interrupted as they stood near the bar. "What a pleasant surprise." Anani's posture shifted subtly, though his expression remained neutral. "Cardano," he acknowledged, turning to face a distinguished older man flanked by two younger associates. Victor Cardano, head of the rival family, smiled thinly. His gaze shifted to Melissa with undisguised interest. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Melissa Wright," Anthony answered before she could speak. "My guest." The emphasis he placed on the final word carried clear meaning. Cardano's smile never faltered, but something calculating entered his eyes. "Enchanted," he said, taking Melissa's hand and brushing his lips against her knuckles in a gesture that lingered just long enough to be inappropriate. "I've heard so much about you." Melissa extricated her hand with a polite smile that revealed nothing of her discomfort. "All good things, I hope." "Fascinating things," Cardano corrected, the restaurant owner who caught the attention of Chicago's most eligible bachelor. "You must be quite special." The implied question hung in the air. Anani's hand at her waist tightened fractionally. "Ms. Wright's restaurant is exceptional," he said smoothly. "As is her company. You should visit the Hearth sometime, under appropriate circumstances, of course." The subtle warning wasn't lost on any of them. Cardano inclined his head slightly. "Perhaps I shall, when circumstances permit." His gaze remained fixed on Melissa. After they moved away, Melissa released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So that's Cardano." "Victor Cardano," Anthony confirmed, his voice tight. Head of the family. More sophisticated than his subordinates, but no less dangerous. He seemed interested in me. Not in you, Anthony corrected gently. In what you represent, a potential vulnerability. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and carefully orchestrated socializing. Anthony remained attentive throughout, but Melissa could sense the tension that never quite left him after their encounter with Cardano. It was after midnight when they finally left, the car gliding through Chicago's empty streets toward her apartment. I'm sorry, Anthony said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, for putting you in that position. I chose to be there, she reminded him. Besides, it was educational. A small smile touched his lips. Educational. I learned more about your world tonight than in all the previous weeks combined. She turned to face him fully. The way people defer to you, the careful dance of alliances and threats disguised as pleasantries. And knowing this doesn't make you reconsider? Melissa reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. I knew who you were when I chose this, Anthony. Tonight just made it more concrete. They arrived at her building, and as usual, he escorted her to her door. The routine had become familiar, the careful distance he maintained, the restrained goodbye that spoke of his continued determination to give her space. Tonight, however, Melissa had other ideas. When they reached her door, she turned to face him. Would you like to come in? The invitation hung between them, its meaning unmistakable. Anani's eyes darkened, but he made no move to cross the threshold. Are you certain? In answer, she reached up, cradling his face between her palms, and kissed him with all the pent-up desire of the past weeks. His response was immediate and overwhelming, arms encircling her, pulling her against him as the last of his famous control began to crumble. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, the question in his eyes had been replaced by something hungrier, more primal. I'm certain, she whispered, taking his hand and leading him inside. What followed was both tender and fierce, Anani's careful restraint finally giving way to passionate abandon. His hands and lips seemed to worship every inch of her, his whispered words of admiration shifting between English and Italian, as emotion overcame his usual eloquence. Later, as they lay tangled in her sheets, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, Melissa felt a sense of rightness that defied logical explanation. This man, this dangerous, complex man, had somehow become essential to her happiness. What are you thinking? He murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. That I should be terrified by how right this feels, she admitted. But I'm not. His arms tightened around her. Good. The peaceful moment was shattered by the harsh ring of his phone. Anthony tensed immediately, reaching for it with a frown. The brief conversation that followed was conducted in rapid Italian that Melissa couldn't follow. When he hung up, his expression had transformed, the tender lover replaced by the calculating Don. I have to go, he said, already rising and reaching for his clothes. What's wrong? He hesitated, then committed to honesty. One of our warehouses. There's been an incident. The euphemism wasn't lost on her. Cardano? Most likely. He dressed with efficient movements, his mind clearly already shifting to the crisis at hand. I'll send Marco to watch your apartment. Don't leave until you hear from me. The swift transition from intimacy to crisis management was jarring but illuminating. This was the reality of loving a man like Anthony. These moments would always be subject to interruption, to the demands of his position. At the door, he paused, looking back at her with an expression that seemed torn between two worlds. Then he returned to the bed, cupping her face in his hands. This changes nothing, he said fiercely. What happened between us, what's happening between us is separate from everything else. Remember that. She nodded, reaching up to straighten his tie in a domestic gesture that felt strangely significant. Be careful always. He kissed her once more, hard and quick, then was gone. Melissa slept fitfully, waking at every sound, her mind conjuring scenarios each more troubling than the last. When morning came with no word from Anthony, Anxiety began to gnaw at her composure. Marco remained stationed outside, his stoic presence both reassuring and concerning. When she brought him coffee, his normally impassive expression showed hints of strain. "Is he okay?" she dared to ask. Marco's hesitation spoke volumes. "The Don can handle himself," he finally answered, which wasn't really an answer at all. By noon, with still no contact, Melissa was debating whether to defy Anani's instructions and go to the restaurant. Anything to distract herself from worried speculation, when a familiar black SUV pulled up outside. Relief flooded through her until she saw who emerged. Not Anthony but Salvatore, his consigliere, looking grave. "Ms. Wright," he greeted her formally. "Don Moretti requests your presence." The phrasing sent ice through her veins. "Is he hurt?" Salvatore's expression softened slightly. "Not physically, but the situation is complicated. He needs you." The drive was conducted in tense silence. They didn't go to Anani's mansion or to any of his known properties, but to a nondescript building in an industrial area, heavily guarded by men Melissa recognized as part of his security detail. Inside, she was led through sterile corridors to what appeared to be a private medical facility. Salvatore paused outside a door, his hand on the knob. "Prepare yourself," he advised quietly. Last night was difficult. Nothing could have prepared Melissa for the sight that greeted her. Anthony stood by a window, still in the clothes from the previous night, now rumpled and stained. His knuckles were raw. A cut above his eye had been stitched, and his expression was more closed off than she'd ever seen it. But it was the figure on the bed that drew her horrified gaze. A young man, barely into his 20s, lay connected to various machines, his face badly beaten, bandages covering what appeared to be more serious wounds on his torso. "Who is he?" Melissa whispered. Anthony turned at her voice, his expression momentarily softening before the mask descended again. "Paolo, one of my youngest soldiers. They left him at the warehouse as a message." "Cardano?" "Yes." The single word contained volumes of controlled rage. "This," he gestured to the injured man, "crosses lines. Even in our world, certain boundaries are respected." Melissa approached slowly, taking in the full extent of Anani's dishevelment, so at odds with his usual impeccable appearance. "You've been here all night." "He has no family," Anthony said simply. "My men are my responsibility." In that moment, Melissa saw another facet of the complex man she was falling for. The leader who genuinely cared for those under his protection, who took personal responsibility for their welfare. She reached for his hand, carefully avoiding the damaged knuckles. "What happens now?" Anani's eyes, when they met hers, held a cold determination that sent a shiver down her spine. "Now we end this." 3 months later, Melissa stood in the newly renovated second floor of the Hearth, surveying the elegant private dining space that had once been a dusty storage area. Rich wood paneling, soft lighting, and comfortable seating created an atmosphere of exclusive intimacy, perfect for the special clientele who now regularly requested private dining. "It's perfect," Anthony said, coming up behind her and slipping his arms around her waist. He pressed a kiss to the curve of her neck. "You've created something remarkable here." She leaned back against his solid chest, still marveling at the changes in both the restaurant and her life. "We did. I couldn't have managed this renovation without your help." "Your vision, my resources," he corrected gently. "A good partnership." The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Their relationship had deepened in the months following the confrontation with the Cardanos, a confrontation that had ended with Victor Cardano's sudden retirement to Sicily and the ascension of his more reasonable nephew to leadership of the family. Anthony never discussed the details of what had transpired, and Melissa never asked. Some boundaries remained, some questions better left unvoiced. What mattered was the peace that had followed, the gradual relaxation of security measures, and the increasing normalcy of their life together. "Speaking of partnership," Anthony said, turning her in his arms to face him, "I have something for you." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box, not the ring-sized box she half expected, but flat and rectangular. Inside lay a key. "What's this?" she asked, though she had her suspicions. "The key to my home," he said simply. "I want you to move in with me. Or," he hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain, "I could move in here, above the restaurant, whatever you prefer." Melissa cradled the key in her palm, feeling the weight of what it represented. "Your home has better security," she said practically, which made him smile. "Is that a yes?" In answer, she rose on tiptoes to kiss him. Yes. Later that evening, as they hosted an intimate dinner for Anani's inner circle to celebrate the reopening of the expanded restaurant, Melissa looked around at the faces that had become as familiar to her as family. Sophia, elegant as always, deep in conversation with Salvatore. Marco and Luca, maintaining their usual watchful presence while enjoying rare moments of relaxation. Even Paolo, now fully recovered, laughing with the younger members of Anani's organization. This strange collection of people, bound by loyalty and shared purpose, had somehow become her people, too. "A toast," Anthony announced, rising to his feet and lifting his glass. "To the hearth, and to the remarkable woman who created it." As glasses were raised in her honor, Melissa felt a surge of emotion. A year ago, she'd been struggling to keep her modest restaurant afloat, living a simple, if precarious, existence. Now, she stood at the center of an expanding enterprise, loved by a man whose world she'd once thought beyond her understanding. "And another announcement," Anthony continued, his hand finding hers under the table. "As some of you may have guessed, Melissa will be moving into the family home next month." The news was met with knowing smiles and congratulations. Sophia raised her glass again. "Finally, perhaps now my brother will stop checking his phone every 5 minutes when he's away from you." Laughter rippled around the table. Anthony squeezed Melissa's hand, a private acknowledgement of the truth in his sister's teasing. Later, as their guests departed, Anthony led Melissa to the small balcony overlooking the street where they had first met. The winter night was cold but clear, stars visible despite the city lights below. Life continued, pedestrians hurrying home, cars passing, all unaware of the drama that had unfolded in this unassuming corner of Chicago. "A year ago," Anthony said softly, "I was stumbling through a blizzard, my car broken down 6 blocks away, my phone dead, certain I was facing a very cold end." Melissa smiled at the memory. "And I was about to close up, wondering if I'd make rent that month. Fate has strange methods," he mused, turning to face her fully. "I never believed in destiny until I met you." The hard-headed Don Moretti, talking about fate? She teased gently, though her heart quickened at the intensity in his eyes. "I've changed," he acknowledged simply. "You've changed me." It was true. The cold, calculated efficiency that had defined him was now tempered by something softer, more human. He remained Don Moretti to his people, commanding respect and loyalty. But with Melissa, he was simply Anthony, a man capable of tenderness, laughter, and profound love. "We've changed each other," she corrected, thinking of her own transformation from cautious restaurant owner to confident partner of one of Chicago's most powerful men. She had learned to navigate his world without losing herself in it, to accept the darker aspects without condoning them. Anthony reached into his pocket and this time withdrew a very different box, small and square. Melissa's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a ring, the diamond catching the moonlight. "I had a speech prepared," he said with a small, self-deprecating smile. "Something eloquent about second chances and new beginnings. But standing here where everything started, all I can think to say is that I love you, Melissa Wright, more than I thought possible." Tears pricked at her eyes as he continued. "I know my world isn't simple. I know the life I'm offering comes with complications most women would run from. But if you'll have me—" "Yes," she interrupted, unable to wait for the formal question. "Yes, Anthony." His smile, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, bloomed as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly like everything else between them. "My grandmother used to say that feeding people was a form of love," Melissa said softly as he drew her close. I think she'd be amazed to see where that philosophy led me. To a very complicated man with a very simple love for you, Anthony replied, his forehead resting against hers. As snow began to fall gently around them, a poetic echo of their first meeting, Melissa marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From a chance encounter during a blizzard to this moment of perfect clarity. Their path had been neither straight nor easy. Yet every difficult choice, every moment of doubt or danger, had led to this certainty. In loving Anthony Moretti, she had discovered parts of herself she never knew existed. Strength, resilience, the capacity to see beyond surface appearances to the complex truth beneath. And in loving her, he had found redemption he never thought possible. A connection that transcended the boundaries of his cloistered world. Outside, Chicago continued its restless pace. Inside, in the warm circle of his arms, Melissa had found her home. Complicated, unexpected, and absolutely right. Two people from different worlds, brought together by a snowstorm, and bound by something stronger than circumstance. A mafia boss and a waitress, defying every expectation to write their own unlikely story. As Anani's lips found hers in a kiss that promised forever, Melissa knew with absolute certainty that some risks were worth taking, some loves worth fighting for, and some happy endings arrived in the most unexpected packages. The delicate china cups, likely costing more than Melissa's entire monthly rent, held steaming tea. She couldn't help but survey the refined and luxurious surroundings, a far cry from her own humble apartment. "Is this really his place?" she blurted out, a question hanging in the air. Sophia, ever composed, delicately stirred her tea before responding. "One of them. This is the family's main house where we both grew up, actually." Before Melissa could process the information, the door swung open, and Anthony strode in. He was impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit, the kind that probably cost a fortune. It hid any sign of the previous night's turbulent events, save for the faint, almost imperceptible shadows under his eyes that hinted at a sleepless night. "My apologies for the delay," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. He crossed the room to plant a light kiss on his sister's cheek before turning his attention to Melissa. His gaze softened, and there was a hint of warmth, albeit a cautious one, in his expression. "Thank you for coming, especially considering my absence." Sophia, with a graceful motion, began to rise from her chair. "I've been keeping your guest entertained," she announced, a slight smile playing on her lips. "But I suspect you two have things you need to discuss." As she passed Melissa, she gave her shoulder a brief, almost sisterly squeeze, a surprising gesture of solidarity. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "Remember what I told you, okay?" Then, with a final, knowing glance, she left them alone. Anthony followed his sister's departure with a slightly raised eyebrow, a silent question hanging in the air. "Should I be concerned about whatever she told you?" he finally asked, turning back to Melissa. Melissa managed a small, fleeting smile that quickly faded. "Probably," she responded, her voice soft. He moved with a practiced grace to sit beside her on the plush sofa. They were close but not quite touching. He took a breath and began to explain. "Last night was purely business, Melissa. Unpleasant but absolutely necessary." A knot formed in Melissa's stomach, and she couldn't help but ask the question that had been plaguing her mind. "Did anyone get hurt?" Anthony met her gaze directly, his eyes unwavering. "Yes," he admitted, the single word laden with unspoken weight. Melissa had known, deep down, that this was the reality of his world. But hearing it confirmed so plainly still struck her hard. His voice dropped, becoming almost a murmur. "This is my world, Melissa. There's a part of me I desperately don't want to touch you. But the truth is, if we continue down this path, it inevitably will." Melissa's eyes searched his, trying to understand. "Why are you showing me this place now?" she finally asked. He sighed softly and replied, "Because I need you to see the whole picture. The protection, the privilege, the immense power, and the terrible price that comes with it." He gestured around the opulent room, encompassing the entire house with his sweeping hand. This house represents generations of my family's legacy, both the good and the bad. It's beautiful, impressive, but built on foundations that you might find incredibly troubling. Melissa's gaze shifted, now seeing beyond the surface of elegance and wealth. She recognized, in a way she hadn't before, the complex and often brutal reality that underpinned it all. Her heart still clung to the man beside her, but she was beginning to understand the darkness that also surrounded him. She finally turned to face him fully, the question burning in her eyes. Why me, Anthony? With your life, your world, your position. Why would you choose someone like me? He considered her question with great care, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, his gaze softened, and he spoke, his voice low and sincere. Because you saw me. You saw just me. When I was at my absolute weakest, with no pretense, no power, and absolutely no position to offer. His voice softened even more. And because, when I'm with you, I can almost remember who I might have been in another life. The weeks that followed were a delicate and intricate dance between two vastly different worlds. By day, Melissa poured her heart and soul into running the Hearth, her restaurant that had blossomed into a thriving success. It now attracted an eclectic mix of clientele. Some of Anthony's more intriguing associates, curious locals drawn in by the buzz, and even a few well-known food critics, all eager to sample the increasingly praised fare. By night, she found herself increasingly drawn into Anthony's more private and exclusive sphere. She accompanied him to lavish restaurants, attended small, intimate gatherings at his magnificent home, and was gradually introduced to the inner circle of people who comprised his chosen family. Salvatore, his silver-haired consigliere, treated her with a courtly, old-world courtesy, the kind that barely managed to conceal his intense and meticulous assessment of her character. Marco and Luca, Anthony's ever-present security detail, maintained their professional distance, but even they gradually began to acknowledge her with subtle nods of respect. Perhaps most surprisingly, Sophia became an unexpected and valuable ally, offering Melissa invaluable insights into the complex and often unspoken rules of a world she was still struggling to navigate. Through it all, Anthony remained incredibly attentive and considerate, always careful not to push her further than she seemed willing to go, and always ensuring she had the space and freedom to retreat if she so chose. It was a dance of cautious exploration, a delicate balance between desire and respect. One afternoon, while sharing lunch at an upscale cafe, Sophia leaned forward conspiratorially. "You're being watched, you know." Melissa placed her teacup down carefully, a sense of unease washing over her. "I figured as much. It's not just by Anthony's security, is it?" Sophia's expression remained deceptively casual, but her eyes were constantly scanning their surroundings, assessing every detail. "No. You've become a person of interest in certain circles. The unknown woman who has managed to capture the attention of Don Moretti." Melissa scoffed lightly, trying to downplay the situation. "I'm hardly some mysterious figure. I run a restaurant, for heaven's sake." Sophia's laughter was genuine, but there was a dark undercurrent to it. "In our world, that makes you an anomaly." Anthony's previous companions? They were all from connected families. Predictable. You're an unknown variable. A chill ran down Melissa's spine. "Is that dangerous?" Sophia's response was matter-of-fact. "Everything in this life is dangerous, Melissa. But Anthony has been thorough with security arrangements." The euphemism hung in the air between them. Melissa understood perfectly. In the weeks since their rather tense encounter with the Cardanos, Anthony had been systematically and methodically consolidating his position, strengthening existing alliances and ruthlessly eliminating any potential vulnerabilities. She didn't pry for details, and he didn't volunteer them. But the increased level of deference shown to him by others within their circle spoke volumes. Sophia abruptly changed the subject with an ease born of long practice. "There's an event tonight, a charity gala. Anthony's attendance is expected." She paused, her gaze fixed on Melissa over the rim of her teacup. "He wants you to be there." Melissa's heart skipped a beat. As his date? The prospect was both thrilling and more than a little terrifying. Sophia corrected her bluntly. "As his woman." It would be a very public statement of intent, a clear signal that his protection is officially extended to you. Melissa needed a moment to process this information. What exactly would that mean? Sophia smiled slightly, clearly approving of Melissa's thoughtful question. It means the ambiguity ends. No more guessing games about your role in his life. You would be formally recognized as being under his personal protection. Someone who is considered off-limits to rivals and respected by all allies. Melissa hesitated, then asked, "And what would be expected of me?" Sophia's smile widened, revealing a hint of genuine warmth. Loyalty, of course. Discretion is paramount. And an understanding that certain matters remain strictly within the family. She shrugged elegantly. Beyond that, Anthony has never cared much for adhering to traditional expectations. Later that evening, a beautifully wrapped package arrived at Melissa's apartment. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, lay an exquisite evening gown crafted from deep emerald silk. It shimmered and flowed like liquid moonlight. Alongside it was a small, velvet box, and inside, a delicate diamond necklace sparkled under the light. A simple card was tucked inside the box. In elegant script it read, "No pressure, your choice." The gesture was quintessential Anthony. Offering without demanding, always giving her the freedom to choose her own path. It was an act of both incredible respect and subtle enticement, making her decision both easier and infinitely more complicated. When his car arrived punctually that evening, Anthony appeared genuinely surprised, and perhaps even a little relieved, to see her waiting. She stood just inside the doorway, radiant in the emerald gown that fit her as though it had been custom-made. "You came," he said softly as she slid into the luxurious leather seat beside him. "I'm here," she confirmed, a touch of playful defiance in her voice. She couldn't help but notice the way his eyes darkened with appreciation as he took her in. He gently reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips in a familiar gesture that never failed to send a warm shiver dancing down her spine. "You understand what tonight means?" he asked, his voice low and serious. She met his intense gaze steadily, her own resolve firm. "I'm choosing this, Anthony. I'm choosing you." Something shifted in his expression, a subtle but significant change. Perhaps it was a flash of relief, or maybe it was a glimpse of the deeper emotions he so rarely allowed himself to reveal. He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing against her collarbone where the diamond necklace rested. "The necklace suits you perfectly. It's beautiful, but it's too much," she protested, feeling a pang of unease at the extravagance of it all. His voice softened. "It was my mother's." The simple statement silenced her objections immediately. Anthony seldom spoke of his mother, who had passed away when he was just a teenager. The fact that he would entrust Melissa with something that had belonged to her spoke volumes about the depth of his feelings. The charity gala was held at one of Chicago's most prestigious hotels, a glittering landmark known for its opulence and grandeur. The ballroom had been transformed into an elegant dreamscape, a wonderland of cascading flowers, shimmering fabrics, and twinkling lights. As they entered the ballroom, Melissa was immediately and acutely aware of the subtle but palpable reaction their arrival generated. Conversations seemed to pause momentarily, heads turned, and curious eyes followed their every move. She could feel the collective assessment, the silent recalculation of the power dynamics at play. Anthony navigated the crowded room with his characteristic practiced ease. His hand remained a constant, reassuring presence at the small of her back as he smoothly introduced her to a carefully chosen selection of guests. Key business associates, influential political figures, and members of other powerful and prominent families. He never explicitly identified her beyond stating her name, Melissa Wright, allowing their obvious closeness and connection to speak for itself. Don Moretti, a smooth, almost oily voice interrupted them as they paused near the elaborately stocked bar. What a pleasant surprise. Anthony's posture shifted subtly, his muscles tensing almost imperceptibly. However, his expression remained carefully neutral. Cardano, he acknowledged, turning to face a distinguished older man who was flanked by two younger, rather menacing-looking associates. Victor Cardano, the head of the rival family, offered a thin, almost predatory smile. His gaze swept over Melissa with undisguised interest, lingering a moment too long. "And who might this lovely lady be?" he purred. Anthony answered before Melissa had a chance to speak, his voice firm and controlled. "Melissa Wright, my guest." The subtle emphasis he placed on the final word resonated with clear and unmistakable meaning. Cardano's smile never faltered, but something sharp and calculating flickered in his eyes. "Enchanted," he said, reaching for Melissa's hand and pressing his lips against her knuckles in a gesture that was both overly familiar and undeniably inappropriate. He held her hand just a fraction of a second too long. "I've heard so much about you, Ms. Wright." Melissa politely extricated her hand, offering a smile that revealed absolutely none of her discomfort. "All good things, I hope." Cardano corrected her with a sly grin. "Fascinating things." The restaurant owner who managed to capture the attention of Chicago's most eligible bachelor. "You must be quite special." The unspoken question hung heavy in the air between them. Anthony's hand at her waist tightened almost imperceptibly, a silent warning. "Ms. Wright's restaurant is exceptional," he stated smoothly, his voice laced with steel. "As is her company. You should pay a visit to the hearth sometime, under appropriate circumstances, of course." The subtle threat was certainly not lost on anyone present. Cardano inclined his head slightly, his eyes still locked on Melissa's. "Perhaps I shall, when circumstances permit." After they had moved away, Melissa released a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. "So that's Cardano." "Victor Cardano," Anthony confirmed, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. "Head of the family. He's more sophisticated than his subordinates, but no less dangerous." He seemed interested in me. "Not in you," Anthony corrected her gently but firmly. "In what you represent. A potential vulnerability, a possible point of leverage." The rest of the evening passed in a dizzying blur of introductions, polite conversations, and carefully orchestrated socializing. Anthony remained attentive and protective throughout, but Melissa could sense the underlying tension that never quite dissipated after their brief but charged encounter with Victor Cardano. It was well after midnight when they finally left the gala, the car gliding silently through Chicago's deserted streets toward her apartment. "I'm sorry," Anthony said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, "for putting you in that position." Melissa turned to him, a small smile playing on her lips. "I chose to."